The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 is a harsh reminder of the morally troubled history of the United States. It highlights the lengths to which a nation can be coerced to comply with a system that is intrinsically wrong and serves as a stark reminder of the morally troubled past of the United States. This contentious piece of legislation, which was enacted as part of the Compromise of 1850, required the return of fugitive slaves to their owners, regardless of where in the country the slaves were at the time of their capture. This video investigates the historical backdrop, provisions, enforcement, and profound influence of the Fugitive Slave Statute. This investigation aims to provide light on the compelling compliance with the evil that the statute contained. The historical context. In order to fully appreciate the importance of the Fugitive Slave Act, one must first have a solid understanding of the larger historical setting of the United States throughout the middle of the 19th century. The institution of slavery had its origins in the southern states of the United States, which were home to agrarian economies that relied heavily on the labor of enslaved African Americans. However, the expanding abolitionist movement in the North created tensions that threatened to rip the nation apart at its very seams. The Fugitive Slave Act was one of the controversial provisions included in the Compromise of 1850, a package of legislative measures enacted to maintain the Union. Clauses of the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 included a number of clauses that defined its laws and regulations. These clauses were organized into sections. These clauses were written with the intention of enhancing the capacity of slaveholders to track down runaway slaves and discourage anyone from assisting or harboring fugitives. The following are the most important provisions of the Fugitive Slave Act. Capture and return. This clause required the owners of runaway slaves to have their former slaves captured and returned to them. It specified that slaveholders or their agents could hunt and apprehend fugitives wherever, including in free states or territories, and bring them back to the jurisdiction from whence they had escaped. Commissioners appointed by the federal government. The act provided for the establishment of commissioners appointed by the federal government to oversee the process of hearing and judging cases involving alleged runaway slaves. The status of the accused individuals was to be determined by these commissioners, and certificates of removal or return were to be issued accordingly. The act removed fugitive criminals' right to be tried by a jury. It was decided that the commissioner would decide each case on their own, which would rule out the idea of a trial that was both fair and impartial. Individuals who impeded the process of capturing, arresting, or returning fugitive slaves were subject to the Act's repercussions, which included the imposition of penalties. Any person who knowingly assisted or sheltered fugitives or obstructed the enforcement of the Act might be subject to monetary fines and perhaps jail time. Assistance from law enforcement. Local law enforcement officers and even ordinary civilians were expected to assist in the arrest and return of fugitives when requested to do so by slaveholders or their agents. This obligation applied to both the capturing of fugitives as well as the returning of such fugitives to their owners. Should compliance not be maintained, there may be legal repercussions. Extradition of fugitives arrested in Canada or other foreign territories. This clause made it possible to extradite fugitives who were arrested in Canada or other foreign territories, provided that sufficient evidence of their escape was presented. Its purpose was to prevent runaway slaves from gaining sanctuary in countries other than the United States. Compensation for slaveholders. The Act provided that slaveholders would be reimbursed for the capture and return of their runaway slaves by guaranteeing that they would receive compensation in the event that their slaves were found. This provision provided slaveholders with an additional incentive to vigorously pursue and reclaim the individuals they had enslaved. Enforcement and slave catching. Slave catching was an inhumane activity that was necessary for the Fugitive Slave Act to be enforced. Hence, this part of the process was referred to as enforcement and slave catching. Slave hunters, also known as slave catchers, would prowl the streets and neighborhoods, aiming their attention at people who were looking for safety and freedom. Even in states where they were legally free, African Americans lived their lives in continual terror of being kidnapped and returned to a life of servitude against their will. The Act's implementation exacerbated racial tensions by making it more likely that free African Americans would be arbitrarily detained and then recaptured. Resistance and the Underground Railroad. Resistance to the Fugitive Slave Act and the Underground Railroad were both important parts of the fight against how cruel slavery was. The Underground Railroad was a network of secret routes, safe places, and abolitionists who helped slaves get to freedom. Conductors, who were often African Americans or white people who liked them, helped fugitives avoid being caught and get to free states or Canada. The Underground Railroad was a secret network that helped slaves escape. It relied on word of mouth and hidden messages to keep the slaves and those involved safe. Harriet Tubman was once a slave who ran away, and she became one of the most well-known people in charge of the Underground Railroad. She made many dangerous trips to the South, where she freed slaves and got the nickname Moses because of how she led. Tubman's bravery and dedication to the cause made a lot of people want to help end slavery. The Underground Railroad had to deal with a lot of dangers and problems. Slave hunters and law enforcement officers actively looked for slaves who had escaped, and the Fugitive Slave Act made it illegal for anyone to help slaves get away. Still, many people in towns broke the law and helped those who were trying to get out. These brave people gave fugitives a place to stay, food, clothes, and rides, which helped them get through dangerous areas and avoid being caught. Collaboration between African Americans and white abolitionists was an important part of the resistance. Quaker towns, which were known for being very against slavery, were very important to the Underground Railroad. A well-known Quaker and anti-slavery activist named Levi Coffin helped set up safe houses and used his home in Newport, Indiana, as a stop on the Underground Railroad. Other abolitionists, like Frederick Douglass and William Still, helped fugitives by giving them help and resources. Impact and divisions. The Fugitive Slave Act deepened the rifts that already existed between the North and the South, bringing the United States one step closer to the precipice of civil war. The act sparked outrage and served as a catalyst for the growth of anti-slavery movements in the North, which had a higher concentration of abolitionists. Newspapers and groups affiliated with the abolitionist movement spread accounts of the act's cruelties to the public, which fueled public sympathy for the emancipation cause. In the South, the act supported the institution of slavery, which in turn perpetuated a culture of racial superiority and reinforced the conviction in the South's right to property. Legal obstacles and their legacy section. The Fugitive Slave Act was met with legal obstacles and opposition in the court of public opinion, as well as in the judicial system. In response to the harsh restrictions enacted by the act, several states enacted personal liberty statutes in an effort to provide fleeing slaves with legal rights and to offset the act's repressive measures. The decision that the Supreme Court made in Prigg versus Pennsylvania is notable because it established a precedent that restricted the role that states may play in the execution of the Fugitive Slave Act. However, following court cases, notably Abelman versus Booth, upheld the act's validity, which reflects the deeply ingrained pro-slavery mindset of the period. Within the abolitionist movement, the Fugitive Slave Act sparked a wave of agitation and civil disobedience, which eventually led to the law's repeal. A number of influential activists and writers, in addition to organizations such as the American Anti-Slavery Society, have spoken out against the inhumanity of the act and asked for it to be overturned. As the nation wrestled with more major problems over slavery and secession, the Fugitive Slave Act was ultimately rendered moot when the Civil War broke out in 1861. This was the beginning of the end of the Fugitive Slave Act. What do you think of the video? Let us know in the comment below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button before you go. Thanks for watching.